Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Mark Grieco. Mark has a very unique background. He is a procurement attorney and educator, accustomed to being in the trenches with the procurement team. In that capacity, he has had the opportunity to observe a number of development opportunities associated with contracts and otherwise. So, hi, Mark. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I shared a little bit about your unique combination of expertise and background, but what else do you think it's helpful for people to know about your professional experience?
I have a weird combination of skills. So I'm a real life practicing procurement attorney. I go to court when contracts fail, but for 25 years plus, I've been an educator in the procurement field. I'm with an organization called SIPS right now. And I travel the world teaching contracts, negotiations, statements of work, project management, all the different things that go into a contract and a scope and bids or tenders, whatever you call them where you are. And then the other cool part to my job is I get to, for very companies large and small across all different categories, help them make their contracts better and negotiate their contracts. So I do all these different things that go together and travel the world doing it. So that's a pretty cool job.
Now, continuing on with this theme of things being unusual, you and I also work together and have already picked out a really unique title for this episode, which is Don't Get Fired. And I believe there's a story behind that. So can I ask you to start us off today by sharing it?
Yeah, so that everybody knows, when Kelly and I started talking, I was asked what I would talk about and what interests me. And it just so happened that I had gone to a function and was going to give a little speech, and there were going to be, this is now, remember, after the pandemic, so everybody starting to come back. And we went to go, my team, the president of my organization and we walked in and went to get on the elevator to go up to the room where we were going to have like cocktails and a speech and all that stuff. And there was a young gentleman standing at the end, very new to procurement, first time coming to a function. And I remember saying to him, well, would you like the elevator opened up in front of us? And I said, well, would you like to join us? And he said, no, I'll take the other elevator. And I said, well, I'm with the president of the company, so why don't you come here? And he really fought on it. I literally had to kind of drag him onto the elevator and ask his name and engage him and introduce him. And then I found that during the entire function, there were a lot of very new procurement people, and they did not leave their little bubble, or they did not, if they came alone, they did not go out and meet people. And that's one of the things where I'm like, you have to have people in procurement who are socializing and interacting and selling the profession. Yeah. And then just to tell you the other story, I was helping a procurement person who became my friend over time, 10 years, 15 years. And she sent me a scope of work. You heard me mention that already. And I reviewed the scope of work. I call it the worst scope of work ever written. And I sent her an email back, and it said world's worst scope of work in the subject line. And she went into the meeting, said exactly what I told her, and they fired her. And they fired her because she didn't really understand the room she was entering into with the president of her organization, the president of the supplier's organization, and that situation should have been handled differently given the audience, and she became a barrier. Yeah. And I think when you take those two stories and you put them together, you find that procurement sits in a very unique position between the C-suite, the stakeholders, and the suppliers. And we are always tasked with making everybody happy. We have none of the say or decision-making power, and it's always our fault. So that's my long answer to that short question.
Well, I do think, first of all, I've had an inspiration for a new contest, Mark. I think we need to start every year. You know, they have like the Darwin Awards for tragic but ridiculous ways that people end up dying. I think we could have a competition annually for worst statement of work ever. I have a feeling there are plenty of other bad statements of work out there.
You will lose that bet. You will lose it. I will win that every time. I have like the top 3 worst ones.
Oh, that's so funny. Framed on the wall or just like somewhere in a drawer of shame?
They're just all keyed up in case I ever need it.
Oh, that's funny.
I've seen somebody, just so you know how bad this scope of work is, I've seen a facilities person staple a piece of carpet to a piece of paper, and that was a better scope than what I looked at.
Well, it's certainly not digital friendly, right? You're not
But it
going
was
to
so good,
upload
I
that
knew
carpet
it was ordering,
sample.
so. And how much?
Oh, that's so funny. But I also agree with you that procurement is in a tough spot, and we always have been, because we have so much responsibility, and that could be around risk mitigation. It could be around cost. It could be around ESG type initiatives. We've got all these responsibilities, but on almost every single case, we're not the ones that get to make the decision. So certainly you talked about that one scenario where the woman misread the room. You have to manage all of these soft dynamics going on. But what other advice would you share for procurement professionals that really start to feel that squeeze, that there's a lot of pressure being put on us, but we can't satisfy these objectives without more influence or decision-making authority?
I do it in a few different ways. So first of all, I separate people into categories. Like some people want to come to me and want to ask advice. Some people are very hesitant. The stakeholders are like, I've got this, and I treat them all very differently. So I will get to a point, let's say I'm with a stakeholder, they haven't come to me before, but they come to me now. Okay, the first thing I learned is you don't say, well, why haven't you come to me before? Or why haven't you come to me sooner? Yeah. Because they're never going to come to you again. Our job is to add value at every step of the way. Sometimes value is just removing a word or answering a question or asking them, understanding what their purchase really is, because you can't help them if you don't understand what it is they're buying and how it's going to be used and why are they replacing this thing that they have. And then as they evolve with me, I'll say to them, you've got this now. So you come to me when there's a problem. I trust you to handle it and see risk, because some of them are, once you empower them and they start to see it, it works really well. One caveat to that, and that is when you start as a procurement person doing this, when you take a stakeholder and you start to advise them on risk, they start to see risk everywhere. Risk that they don't need to worry about. So you will get this kind of overreaction from them. They have to kind of dial it back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and that idea about being accessible, I know I've had a lot of conversations over the years that we talk about, okay, the relationship between procurement and finance, the relationship between procurement and marketing, the relationship between procurement and someone in ops or someone in IT. But I think even as closely as they have to work together, procurement and legal can have a little bit of tension. I remember in my days of being a procurement professional, and you'd have your meeting with the legal person to go in and review whether it's supplier revisions to a contract or their paper, if the supplier was insisting they use it. I swear that room was 20 degrees colder, and you stepped in and you felt about this big standing in the room. What do you think is at the heart of some of the tension that exists there?
Well, first, no attorney should make you feel like that. Okay, a good corporate attorney is your partner in all this, and your advocate in all this, and has your back. And if you feel at all like your attorney doesn't, you're going to the wrong place. Second, you can tell immediately. Now, one thing I say to all procurement people is it is very possible in your corporation, given your contract and your knowledge base, that when you negotiate your contract, you know more than your attorney. You have the knowledge, you have the situational awareness, you have it all, and your attorney doesn't. So you've got to educate them and get them up to speed. An easy way to know that is if you send a contract to legal, and let's say the contract has a limitation of liability clause, and they send you an email back that says that's a business decision. That is not a correct answer. A limitation of liability clause is not a business decision. It's a legal decision. You've got an attorney who's not advised properly. You see what I mean? And
Absolutely.
I think, and you always should make the first attempt. You should do an initial red line, the negotiation, and suggest things and put things in comments and send it to the attorney. And you need to build enough time in for the attorney to do the work. So if your stakeholder is bidding something out and you're locking price in for, say, in the bid, when they bid, the price is good for 30 days, but you're taking 90, 120 days to move it to contract. You have a price in the bid that can go up over time. So you got a lot to juggle.
Absolutely, you do. Well, and I think the other piece that comes into this, because it's interesting, we've talked about reading rooms, we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about interpersonal dynamics. And I think a lot of that is ultimately what determines whether procurement will be successful or struggle to hit their objectives. Do you think that the whole hybrid work environment or working from home has really started to surface as an issue around some of these business decisions that need to be talked through and addressed a little bit more relationally than something straightforward like, what number are we going to put in this box? How are we going to spec out this project? How do you feel like that's affected our work?
Well, first, can I just say it affects our joy? There's
It does.
certain dynamic that I miss, and I don't know if you miss it too, which is just human beings and talking to them. Do you want to know a sad story? I'll tell you a sad story. I was giving a speech. They flew me to New York City. Everybody had the option to come virtually or come in person. A company hosted me. We had 60 attendees. That includes the people from the company.
Yeah.
How many people attended in person, do you think?
I'm sure it was a small number.
0.
Actual zero people.
Even the company's people attended virtually. That's the world that we're in right now. That's how scary your question really is if you think about it and how I look at it. And how can you show your value, right? How can you not be a cost center if you're not in person with people, walking the floor with stakeholders and people in the C-suite and selling what you can do? It's not going to happen like this. So I'm like, everybody, if you are at home and your company says you can come in or you can work from home, make sure that you spend a little bit of time going in person. I call it showing the flag, and walking around and saying hi and making yourself available to people. If you have a facility that is not in one place and you have locations, visit them, talk to them, understand what they're doing out at the locations.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There was actually an article in the Wall Street Journal maybe a week and a half ago that talked about some of the data they're starting to collect around this. And if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, it was that you were 30% less likely to be promoted if you were a completely remote individual and your whole company wasn't. But I think it said even if you only went into the office 2 or 3 days a week or 5 or 6 times a month, there was no diminished likelihood that you will be promoted. So whether it's conscious or not, right, there's also that sort of in between, like, is it something we're saying, well, they haven't come into the office, so we're not going to promote them? That might not even be it. It might just be that you have a much better, richer understanding of the contributions being made by the people that are in the office all the time or regularly enough that you have sort of a face to go with the work.
And procurement as a entire profession, we need to shine. We need to be visible to people. We need people to want to come to us. And we can't be a barrier, which means we as a profession have to be agile. Procurement has to be agile and move quickly so that we can't be blamed for going too slow on things. And that means sometimes listen, one Zoom will take care of like 20 emails. And I'm always like, let's just
Yeah.
hop on a Zoom and do this really quick for you.
Yeah.
And then you have to understand who it is you are talking to and what this contract is going to look like. So if you've got a 10-page contract, I'm never going to put a 30-page contract in, because that's not going to get signed at the end of the day by the suppliers. All I'm doing is creating a barrier. I've got to make it work with who you are and what you're doing. And that's going to vary for everybody based on the category you're buying in. And for example, you can keep a standard, one idea is you could keep your standard contract. Let's say you have a goods and services contract. Imagine all the purchases that contract is meant to cover, and then fight your battles in the scope.
Yeah.
So as you do your scopes get more specific, and your terminology sits in your scope. It doesn't have to necessarily sit in your contract.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of preface this section by talking about needing to feel the joy. So there are efficiency gains and losses associated with being in person, but then there is a happiness that hopefully for most people accompanies the majority of their work. And I think there's professional effectiveness that we need to think about, but there's also mental health. I mean, we are social creatures that need to be in the office having contact with people. And I think about those 60 people that all passed on the opportunity to be there in person. And no offense, Mark, but even if they didn't want to be there in person to meet with you, they also didn't want to be there in person to meet with, get to know, have lunch with, grab a drink with any of those other 60 people. That it feels like something's kind of off there socially.
I know, and from a turnout standpoint, the turnout was great.
Yeah.
But the sad part was nobody wanted to interact and talk or show their face, or that's kind of where we're at. And so now it's a very different thing when I go teach and I do in-house, I say to them, everybody's got to show up. Everybody's got to come in person. Nobody attends virtually, because I don't want to even give them that option.
That's right.
And as from a joy standpoint, we all have to find the joy in what we're doing. It can be little things. When I teach remotely now, I tell everybody in advance they're going to be showing their faces. And I go to the head of procurement who is bringing me in, and I say, I want to put a requirement in there as part of my contract that they're going to all show their faces. It changes the dynamic instantly from what everybody's doing, because they can all see each other.
Right. Now, one of the things that I had written down from our previous conversation really resonated with me. And so what I would like to do as a way of sort of wrapping this part of the conversation is to bring that quote back up and have you talk about it a little bit. So what I wrote down is victory is about meaningful connections. I love that idea. Can you speak to what that means to you and how you see it play out in your work?
Well, I have clients, I've been doing this a while now. I have clients who have been with me 25 years, companies that I've been doing training for them for 25 years. And it's those connections you make with people that, for me, first of all, establishes a relationship and a trust where they can call me if they need me and ask for help. And on the reverse, I can make sure that they're always doing okay, and we can have a very different conversation. One thing for everybody to remember in procurement, and this is really important, is every single stakeholder that you talk to receives information differently. Some people you say, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Some people you have to say, it would be crazy if you did that, because that's how they're receiving the information in their head. And so the victory is every single time you talk to a person, no matter who they are, even if they've never talked to you before, that you establish that connection so they remember you and come to you as a resource. That's what that comment means to me.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at things. And I think maybe even the most interesting part about it is not so much about the connections, but about the concept of victory, right? It doesn't have to be, coming in on top over somebody. It doesn't have to be, right, crushing somebody else down. But the idea that victory is achieved one step at a time, one interaction at a time, one bad thing that was warded off at a time, because you figured out how to say, listen, might want to rethink this versus say like, do not do that thing. Making those adjustments, there's such an opportunity to be meaningful.
And can I add to that?
Of course you can.
Victory is in the eye of the beholder. Some of you feel really frustrated in procurement, okay? And you go home and you beat yourself up.
Yeah.
It took me 15 years to say this to you, which is stop beating yourself up when people don't listen to you. People are going to listen to you. People are not going to listen to you. The victory is in doing your job well and teaching people the risk that is there in a purchase that they are going to make. Whether they decide to accept the risk or mitigate the risk is up to them, but you have done your job. So it's a really hard skill, everybody, to go home and close that door and feel like I did a good job today. You're doing your job. Your job is as a risk advisor. And so try not to look at victory like, okay, well, we got a great contract and we beat up our supplier. That's not a victory.
And so from victory, we move to heroism. So Mark, this is one of our traditions here on the Sourcing Hero. I put this pairing of questions in front of every guest the first time they join me. You can choose either one to answer, and there are no wrong answers. So we're willing to take in whatever you have to share with us.
Okay.
Here are your two choices. Either what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or what does heroism look like in a business context?
I think I will do the first one, which is more along the lines of what makes a hero. And I will tell you this. I think the entire profession of procurement is the hero of an organization. We may not get the credit, we might get the blame, but we're the heroes. We keep all the purchases moving in an organization. We help people find suppliers. We teach people to be innovative. We come up with new ideas. We might move one word in a contract and change the entire thing, taking the word reasonable and changing it into buyer's discretion. So you're taking a standard that is totally unclear and saying it has to satisfy my business partner. And one change makes you a hero.
Excellent. Well, Mark, I genuinely appreciate you being here today to share what did end up being a very unique perspective. I think we managed to deliver on our goal. If people are meeting you here for the first time and would like to learn more about you, your background, your perspective, some of the trainings and things that you offer, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
They can send me an email. My email is Grieco, at iCloud.com. And send me an email and I will be happy to talk to you, everybody. Even if you just have a question or you need a mentor. I'm a big believer in mentorship at this point in my career. So feel free to reach out. Don't be afraid.
Mark, thank you so much for being with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.